You know, some stories sound so unbelievable they have to be made up. Well, this is one of those, except it's completely true. Today we're diving into the story of Desmond Doss, a soldier who walked into the fire of World War II's bloodiest battles without ever carrying a weapon. His story really makes you rethink what it means to be a hero.
So picture this. It's 1945. We're in the final, brutal stretch of the war in the Pacific. On the island of Okinawa, there's this sheer 400-foot cliff face, and on top of it, one of the most heavily fortified Japanese positions of the entire war. And facing this nightmare is a single American soldier, a medic, completely unarmed. This one image is the setup for one of the most incredible acts of courage you'll ever hear about.
All right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of this battle. We're talking about a place the soldiers gave a grim nickname, Hacksaw Ridge.
Yeah, this place was a tactical nightmare, and that's putting it mildly. This wasn't just some hill, it was a fortress. The Maeda Escarpment was a 400-foot sheer cliff, just honeycombed with machine gun nests. The Japanese had spent ages digging in, with a whole web of tunnels and bunkers. Their mortars were already zeroed in on every single possible approach. For the Americans, the only way up was climbing these flimsy cargo nets, totally exposed, straight into what was basically a perfectly designed kill zone. But to really get why our guy was facing this hell on earth with no weapon, we've got to rewind a bit. How did Desmond Doss even end up here? And why was he called a coward by the very men whose lives he was about to save?
So Doss signed up back in '42. But here's the thing, as a devout Seventh-day Adventist, he refused to kill another human being. He wouldn't even touch a rifle. And as you can imagine, that did not go over well in basic training. For years, he was just constantly harassed. Guys threw boots at him while he was praying. His own officers tried to get him discharged, claiming he was mentally ill, but he just stuck with it. He shipped out as a medic, and on Guam and in the Philippines, he started proving everybody wrong, earning 2 Bronze Stars for bravery before he even saw Okinawa.
So you have this total clash of beliefs. On one hand, the army just saw a problem. They saw a liability, a coward, someone who was mentally unfit for combat. But Doss, he saw it completely differently. His convictions were rock solid. Thou shalt not kill, period. But he also felt it was his duty to serve his country and to save lives. And he was determined to do both, without ever compromising his faith. He even observed his Sabbath on Saturdays, right there in the middle of a war zone.
Okay, so let's jump back to that cliff on Okinawa. The assault is underway, the battle is just raging, and Doss is right there in the thick of it, armed with nothing but his medic kit.
The American attack on Hacksaw Ridge was an absolute catastrophe, a meat grinder. After hours of ferocious fighting, they were just getting torn to shreds. Machine gun fire, mortars, it was raining down on them. The plateau at the top of that cliff was just littered with wounded and dying Americans. They were trapped, completely exposed, with no way down.
Finally, the commander gives the order, retreat. It's a slaughter. They can't hold the line. The soldiers who can still walk start scrambling back down the cargo nets. But dozens of wounded men are left behind, just waiting for the end. And in that moment, Desmond Doss makes a choice. He watches his company retreat, and he stays, all alone.
Now it turns out Doss had a secret weapon, but it wasn't a gun. It was a knot. Seriously, back in training, he'd accidentally tied a standard bowline knot with 2 loops instead of 1. People kind of laughed at him for it, but he remembered it. This double bowline was actually perfect for making a makeshift harness. 1 loop under the arms, 1 under the legs. It could lower a man down a cliff securely, without him slipping out. A simple mistake was about to become a miracle.
And so he started this insane one-man rescue operation. In the dark, surrounded by the enemy, he found a sturdy, shattered tree stump near the edge, anchored his rope, and got to work. He'd find a wounded man, strap him into that harness, lower him 400 feet down to the medics waiting below, and then he'd have to haul that heavy, blood-soaked rope all the way back up, hand over hand. And then he'd go find the next man and do it all over again. This just went on for hours. A grueling, exhausting ordeal against the darkness, against his own body giving out, and against an enemy that was now actively hunting for him.
And the danger just kept getting worse. The rough rope was literally tearing the skin off his hands, leaving them raw and bleeding. Japanese patrols, figuring out that wounded men were vanishing, started sweeping the cliff edge, looking for him. At one point, a flare goes up, lighting the whole plateau like it was daytime, catching him right in the open, dragging another soldier. He just froze, praying they wouldn't see him. Then the Japanese found his anchor point and started shooting at it, forcing him to find a new spot in the pitch black.
So you really have to ask yourself,
How could anyone keep going? He was exhausted, his hands were shredded, he was totally alone, and he was being hunted. By any logical measure, the mission was impossible. It was over.
But he did keep going, and it was because of this one simple prayer. Every time he lowered a man to safety, after he pulled that rope back up and fought through the pain and the sheer exhaustion, he would just whisper to himself, "Lord, please help me get one more." That became his mantra. That was the fuel that pushed him way, way past any normal human limit. Just one more, and then one more after that.
So, how many times did he say that prayer? By the time the sun came up the next morning, Desmond Doss had single-handedly lowered 75 wounded soldiers down that cliff face to safety. 75. Let that sink in for a second.
But believe it or not, Doss's story didn't end that night on the ridge. His service on Okinawa wasn't over, and he would end up paying a huge physical price for his incredible courage.
A few weeks later, on May 21st, his war came to a violent end. A grenade landed in a shell hole with him and 3 other men. Without a second thought, he used his own body to shield them, taking the full blast himself. 17 pieces of shrapnel ripped through his legs. As medics were carrying him off on a stretcher, he saw another man who was hit worse, so he rolled off and told them to take the other guy first. And while he was waiting, a sniper's bullet shattered his arm. Unbelievably, he grabbed a rifle stock, the one thing he swore never to touch, used it to make a splint for his own arm, and crawled 300 yards back to an aid station.
The cost of all this heroism was permanent. Beyond the shrapnel and the broken arm, he caught a bad case of tuberculosis in the Philippines, which ended up costing him a lung. He would spend the next 5 years in army hospitals. He was left permanently disabled for the rest of his life.
But his legacy was absolutely cemented. On October 12, 1945, President Truman personally awarded him the Medal of Honor, the very first one ever given to a conscientious objector. And in maybe the ultimate sign of respect, the men from his unit actually went back to Hacksaw Ridge after the battle was over and searched that bloody plateau until they found the small Bible he'd lost and they returned it to him. He lived a quiet life after that, passing away in 2006 at the age of 87.
When you step back and look at the whole story, the irony is just staggering. The very same soldiers who had bullied him, who called him a coward and tried to get him kicked out of the army, they owed their lives to his unwavering conviction and his absolute refusal to carry a weapon. His strength was never about taking a life, but about his unbreakable commitment to saving one.
And this whole thing leaves us with a really powerful question to think about. The story of Desmond Doss kind of forces us to reconsider our definitions of words like courage and duty and sacrifice. It asks all of us, what is the true measure of strength?